as a painter, you will have access to or knowledge of materials which are very, very alluring, and you'll want to be using those, or you think you'll need to be using those in order to make successful paintings. Now, most of the time that is not the case at all. You can make very successful paintings without all the bells and whistles, and very often when you're faced with the problem of where am I getting my materials from, you can make spectacular outcomes because of those restrictions. So as often, I'm going to ask you to reframe the problem. So if you think you need a material, or you need access to something in order to make a painting good, or a good painting, just take a step back and ask yourself why that might be. Why you think you need this particular thing in order to make a successful painting. And in that sense, I'm going back to what I spoke about a few weeks ago, in that, there's an art school mentality of recycle and reuse and transform whatever you've got in order to make something great. So in that sense, everything has a use, and don't discount anything just because it may on the surface not appear to be of any use for you, because it will be of use, I can guarantee it. So I want to talk about surface to begin with, and we'll often think about a surface in painting as being, at least in a contemporary world, as being a canvas and occasionally a panel. Now, if you've not got access to a canvas, how are you going to paint, right? That might be your biggest barrier to wanting to go to paint. Ask yourself, what do I have access to? Now, that might be something very common. It might be post-it notes. I had a student a number of years ago who had always generating ideas. They weren't lazy in any sense. They were very productive with what they wanted to do, but the actual doing was the block. And they had journals and notebooks, and they were crammed full of ideas, written notes, post-it notes. Now, in that sense, they were already making. They just didn't realise it, because the written stuff that they had within those books, that was work. Okay, so when we're thinking about surface, it might be you've already got the material and you just don't know it yet. It might be you've got loads of written material that you can use and bring together and turn into something. Or it may be that you've got those notes and then you want to work on them. So it may be that you are building that into the work, and that was the solution that student came to. Those notes became the work. So it may be something like paper. It may be existing materials that you already have. The things that you may not think are valuable in themselves, or things which you will just do. You might scribble a lot, you might take notes, you might do all sorts of things that you will not see as a valuable output until you really start looking at it, investigating it. Rubbish. What constitutes as rubbish? there are things you will discard and things you will throw away, or things that other people will throw away that will be of use to you. So I very often I'll work on panel these days, or occasionally something really interesting called cartonnage, and I'll hopefully do a video on that in the future. But for me, I prefer hard surfaces where I don't have any elasticity or bounce, because often I work thick and the surface for me is something I like to scrape away at or excavate or build up. And I've found over the years I can't do that very well on canvas. Now, I was scrambling about in my studio earlier in the week. I thought I've used up all my nice boards, all the bits that I've cut out over the summer. I've used all those up, or they're ongoing at the minute. But I want to make some more paintings. I like to keep a good amount in rotation so that I don't get bored or frustrated with a particular piece. And I made some stuff last year over the summer. I made a table, and I had loads of offcuts from that, which I kept because I knew they'd be useful for something. At the time, I didn't know what. So I had loads and loads of long strips of ply. And what I've done is I've cut them down into a manageable size, very small. These are extremely small. And what I'll be doing is I'm going to paint on these, right? So on the surface, they may not appear to be useful. And it would have been very easy just to have thrown these away because it's just scrap wood. But I can do something with these. And I will do something with these. So ask yourself, what have I got access to? One of the things I do outside of painting, just to switch off, is I sew. And that means often I've got loads of scraps of fabric about. Now, if you've got scraps of fabric, that's an ideal substrate to paint on. You can prepare it, you can stretch it, you can paint on it. That's a nice, easy way. And that, if you've got scraps of fabric lying about, it doesn't, if you want to work a particular size and you've got loads of little scraps of fabric, don't let that deter you. One of the things which the old masters used to do, they didn't have access to the kind of sizes of widths of fabric that we have now, that we take for granted. So often, and you'll find this, that there's some written accounts with Titian and his Posier, a whole series of works that he did that were very grand, very big paintings. Now, the canvas just didn't come in that kind of size, so the arrangement that had to be made was the canvas would be stitched together. Now, that means there'll be a visible stitch line on the surface of a painting. And there are things you can do to hide it. You may not want to hide it. Certainly, if you've got a line across it going horizontally, you'll be able to see it a lot more than if the stitch line is vertically. And there are accounts of Titian getting a complaint that this painting, one of his paintings for the King of Spain, had been creased, but the chances are really that the likelihood was that this was a stitch line, and you can see it in the surface of the canvas. Velázquez was also used to stitch on, add on into his canvases, and you can see this. So what I'm saying is, don't use your imagination, right? Use your imagination. If you've got scraps of material, scraps of fabric, but you want to work larger, stitch them together, fix them together, figure out a way in which you can work slightly bigger if you want to. And that might mean that you're leaning into things that are then going on in the surface. If you know people, right? If you have connections, friends, family, whoever, if they have a hobby that generates material that they won't make use of, get it, ask for it, see what you can do with it. Sawdust is always really handy to have. Scraps of wood, fabric, cardboard, ridiculous things you would never think of. Now, that sense of reusing material doesn't just have to exclusively be based around a surface. It might also be thinking about what you're using, like the implements. Traditionally it'd be a brush or a palette knife. It doesn't have to be those things. I mean, often when we think about fine art brushes, the very fine things, the very beautiful things that have a lot of flexibility to them, that would let you make particular marks and come in all shapes and sizes. Now, I work a lot with marble dust, and that is very harsh on your brushes, and I'm quite partial to using bristle hog hair brushes because I like how that lays the paint down on the canvas or the surface. And the drawback of using that marble dust is that it will wear your brushes out a lot. So I've got a whole series of brushes that have been worn down to nothing, which are not fit for most marks, except I really like making marks with them because they do things that you won't get out of a nice new brush. And I can scrape into the surface and I can trowel into it and I can lay a whole glob of paint on that just wouldn't be possible in a way with a fancy nice brush. I've got a brush, one of my favourite brushes is the brush I've had for about 20 years, and it's completely worn down to nothing. And a few years ago I was working and I was really scraping into the surface with this brush, and the handle snapped, and I thought, Jesus, what am I going to do now? I just duct taped it together. I've still got it. I use it all the time. It's still my favourite brush. And ordinarily you perhaps might have thrown that away, but I really like the marks it makes, so I'm making it work for me. You might not even want to use brushes, right? You might want to use cutlery. Cutlery works amazingly well for certain marks, and you can buy all sorts of fantastical and fantastically expensive silicone tools, and they'll be like squeegees, and they've got all kinds of different serrations in, or the smooth or the scalloped, and they're expensive, right? You don't need all those. Just get a couple of different knives with serrated edges, butter knives, bread knives. You can do all kinds of crazy marks with that thing, right? Whatever it is you're using. and you get some marks you can't anticipate, some marks that you might really enjoy. Forks work well as well. I think I've said before, at one point I was absolutely fascinated with dental floss, because I could run the paint through the floss and through the surface on the canvas, and I could flick it so I could make marks that I wouldn't be able to anticipate. I could control in some sense, but not wholly, and that would open opportunities for me. So in that sense, you don't have to have it all figured out. And sometimes, even using your hands, there are marks that you want to make that you just can't get with a brush. You just have to go in and make a mark with your thumb or your fingers, and you'll be able to do things then that are more immediate. So you don't really have to have it all figured out. You can learn as you go, and it's important you do learn as you go and have that sense of play in your practice. So all the materials that you think you need, all the fancy things that you think you need, you really don't. And you can get results with objects that you have lying about, and I can guarantee if you go around wherever you're living, your house, go outside in the garden, have a look about you, there will be things you can make use of. So one of the things I'm going to ask you this week to do something, if you're up for a challenge, and I'll do it as well. So next week I'll come back and I'll talk about and show what the outcome has been for me. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to find an improbable surface on which to paint, and that can be anything you want, right? And maybe something you don't want. Maybe it's something you think, what the hell am I going to do with this? What's going to happen? So find an improbable surface. I've got some denim lying about that they're just scraps. There's not a lot I could do with them in terms of physically making something like a garment. I can't. It's too small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some denim. I'm probably going to mount it on a board, and then I'll paint on it. So what I'm going to ask you to do, find an improbable surface, see what that is, and every day, or perhaps every other day, for 5 minutes a day, go and work on that surface. Just a series of marks. Don't expect anything from it. Just make a series of marks for 5 minutes a day. If you get into the zone, carry on. But just as a way to get making and getting to do things. Because by the end of the week, over those 7 days, you will have something that you spent 5 minutes a day. It's not a whole lot. You'll have a series of marks that have been built up into something. And that's just about getting into the habit of making, into the habit of doing, into the habit of creating. So all the things we've been talking about and thinking about over the last few weeks, where am I going to work? How am I going to work? what are the barriers to my being able to make and paint? This will be a very nice way where you can just pick something up. It might be very small, just so that you can get comfortable working, get comfortable doing. And next week, see what you've got. You might even want to share it with the world, who knows. But we'll see what I end up with next week. That should be fun. Just enjoy the process, just go with the process and see what you can recycle and reuse and remake, right? And if you like this video, subscribe to my channel. You'll get notified of when there's new videos each week. Share it if you like, but I'll see you next time.